So, as discussed, the way I want to create a .NET project core. Okay. In the .NET core, you see there is a solution under which you will have a project. Okay, which is a core project. Now, when you double click on this, you will get a project group. In that, the targeted framework is .NET 6.0. Okay, this .NET 6.0 is a LTS support. When I say .NET 6.0 core framework is a LTS. When I say LTS, long-term support. I got my point. And .NET 8.0 core framework is also a LTS. Either 6.0 framework you have to target or you have to target 8.0. That is the latest version of .NET Core. Okay, so you have to use long-term support. Right? So this is your ASP.NET Core application. Now coming back, and I'm going to close this. Now I'm also closing this. What is your startup project in any of your application? Program.cs file. Under which, what is the method? What is the method? Always any program, if it is console application, if it is a Windows application, main method is your startup program. Am I right or wrong? Now, if you go and see here in the program.c, you won't see a main method. Because this comes under C#10. Which is inbuilt in program.cs. By default, program.cs file containing a main method inbuilt. Or you got my point? You no need to worry about it. Whatever the code you are writing in program.cs file, it is a startup main method. It is a startup main method. And then you see here, there is an MVC. You see here, the application name you are created. What is the application name you created? Sample.mvc core application. Okay, this sample.core application, if you go here, there you can see the list of information. One is sample application, another one is IAS Express. Or you got my point? You see a two difference. When you click on this, a window will be pop-up. A window will be pop-up. A command prompt window will be pop-up. After that, a browser will come up with the data. You see here. See? How many windows are open? Two windows. One is a command prompt window. Another one is a browser. What is the purpose of this command prompt window? This command prompt window acts as a web server. This command prompt window will be act as a web server. Or you got my point? And it will try to create a URL for the application. You see here, it is creating a URL for the application. And then it started content root path. From which location the path has been created. That path will be associated with that URL. Or you got my point? So, ASP.NET Core has an inbuilt web server. ASP.NET Core has an inbuilt web server. Or you got my point? Now, if you look into here, if I close, what will happen? The process execution stopped. Again, you have to close it. Or you got my point? So, how basically this will happen is, Listen carefully. In the shapes, you will have a web application. Okay, this is your web application. I got my point. To run this web application, you need a web server. To run the web application, you need a web server. I got my point. To run this web application, you need a web server. Microsoft.NET, ASP.NET Core has a web server called kernel, which is inbuilt in core application. So what will happen? You can have one more shape insert, which is a kernel server. Filled with yellow. There you can have kernel is a server. Okay, kernel is a server. Or you got my point? This kernel server internally connect with this kernel server internally talk to web application. Okay, now if you go and see the fill style, you can take this style. This kernel server internally talk to the web application. Okay, so you have to say web application. Whenever you make a request from this application to this kernel server, okay, you are not directly connecting to the web application because kernel server is the starting point of any request. Kernel server will receive the request. Kernel server will receive the request and try to process kernel server will try to process the request from the web application. After completing the process, what will happen? The response will back given to the kernel server. Again, it will given to the web application. This is kernel server is an inbuilt to your ASP.NET Core application. So can I say point number 1, ASP.NET Core application will run under a web server called kernel, which is inbuilt in .NET Core framework. Or you got my point? So the very first point is how you are trying to run the ASP.NET Core application. The ASP.NET Core application will run under a web server using kernel. Because we already talked about ASP.NET application. We start about whenever you make a request, the request will receive from the application and then we will process the request and send. There you will have web server. Am I right or wrong? Sir, do you have only kernel server? Is there any other server can I build? Because kernel server is an inbuilt to the web server, which is highly impossible to change the server. So if I go with other servers, you see here, there is an option called IIS Express. You see here, there is another option called IIS Express. This IIS Express will be treated as a proxy server. This IaaS request will be treated as a proxy server. What is meant by proxy server? What is meant by a proxy server? Any request from the client will hit to the proxy server. Proxy server internally calls your kernel server. Are you got my point? Are you all clear online? Suresh?
Yes, sir.
So can you please repeat once?
So now if you go here,
Hello.
select IaaS Express, run it. It will directly open a web browser. It will not connect the kernel server because kernel server internally running. You are suppressing the server within the core framework. Right now you are running with proxy server. Earlier, we are not using a proxy server. Now you are using a proxy server. What is the proxy server? Either IaaS or Nginx or Linux Apache. Or you got my point? So these are all called as proxy servers. Come again? WS? That is not required. That is WSDL. That is not required. WSDL nobody will use. This WSL, right? Nobody will use. Sir, and to run this program, you see there is a settings in the Solution Explorer. You say launch setting.json. All these profiles are created. These are all profiles. All these profiles are created in launch settings. Now, if I go back and change my port as 3400, I never done anything. Now come back. Here I'm going to change, instead of IaaS server, run under IaaS. I'm giving the name as run under IaaS. You see, the profile name will get changed when I save. When I close this, go back. See, when I take a WSL, it automatically calls the settings. Now you can say IaaS Express. I can change this. I don't know why it is not changing. I can change this later point of time. Don't worry about it. I can change the profile name. If I put 1, what will happen? No, it is not allowing. Earlier in other languages, we can able to change the command name. No, you have to change here. Sorry. Command name should not change. You should change run under IaaS. Profile settings you can change. You see here, I'm getting a run line. This is a profile settings. Got my point? Whatever the way you want, you can change. These are all profiles. Under the profile ASP.NET application, under the profile you will have, you can simply go and say here, this is a kernel server. And save it, it automatically changed into kernel server. Or you got my point? You can change the profiles. You can change a number of profiles. You see here, what are all the profiles you have? You have kernel server, run under IaaS, WSL. So, under launch setting.json, under launch settings.json, we can create n number of profiles to execute n number of profiles to execute the ASP.NET Core application. ASP.NET Core application. You got my point? So ASP.NET Core application under launch setting .json, we can create n number of profiles. It's a servers. Profiles are nothing but servers. You got my point? So you are, see, now you come to kernel server. The kernel server, you see there is a command name. By default, project name. Launch browser equal to true. And what is the type of environment? Is it a development environment, production environment, or QA environment? You can decide here. And finally, .NET run message is true. In the application URL, right now you are giving 5110. Now I'm going to remove this. I'm going to say 6556 is my port number. I'm going to give 6566 is your port number. Now, when I run this, this port number will be configured for this application. Or you got my point? You can create it. See, what is your port number is created here? 6556. Who has created that port number? From your launch setting.json, we created that port number. No. Port number always starts with 1096 onwards to 63,000. The range should be 2,000 to 63,000. You can give any port number. Or you got my point? So these are all the profiles you can create. Now coming back to IAS, in the IAS, you will have IAS Express, launch browser, and then development, which internally call this IAS settings. In the IAS settings, you can provide authentication. Authorization is possible. Whereas in your normal kernel server, you cannot do authentication and authorization. Whereas in IAS server, you can do both authentication and authorization. Even you can implement caching mechanism. Or you got my point? So the reverse proxy server will help you to provide. There are two different type of servers in ASP.NET. Different types of web server in ASP.NET. ASP.NET Core. First one is kernel server. What is kernel server? This server is inbuilt in .NET Core application, which will run on its own by setting a profile under launch settings .json file, where it is under where? Under properties folder. Under properties folder. Or you got my point? Whenever you run any ASP.NET with the kernel server, by default, server will start, it will execute it. Or you got my point? Preeti and Suresh, you got the point? Preeti, Suresh.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now the second type is reverse proxy server. You should not say IAS. Reverse proxy server. This server is external to the .NET Core application. .NET Core application. This is your first point. Second point, this server will receive a request. This server will receive the request, pass the same request to the kernel server, which is inbuilt in .NET Core. You got my point? Exactly. Exactly. .NET as its own server. .NET Core as its own server. Earlier in .NET, we don't have that own server. IaaS is by default. But when you are trying to implement .NET Core has its own server called kernel server. Or you got my point? So all your .NET Core application will run under kernel server. No point of it whether you can go and deploy the application in IaaS server. IaaS server will in turn talk to the kernel server of application. Even if you are trying to install in Linux environment by using Apache or Tomcat, the Tomcat server will talk to the kernel server. Even if you are going with Android or iOS or whatever iOS application, there you will have Nginx. Nginx your web server. Nginx also will talk to the kernel server. That is how your .NET will Core become a platform independent. That is how your .NET Core will become a platform independent. Now you got the point? Why .NET Core is platform independent? Because of the kernel server. The kernel server can talk to any different type of reverse proxy server. Till today, we talk about .NET Core will help you to install and deploy in any operating system. What is the actual crux of the program is kernel server. Got my point? So now the server will receive the request, pass the same request to the kernel server. Pass the same request to the kernel server, which is inbuilt in .NET Core. Or you got my point? Which is come on, which is inbuilt in .NET Core application, which is inbuilt in .NET Core application. Or you got my point? And rest are same. So what are all the types of proxy servers we have? What are all the types of C? I can say here the point here. I can say this will be A point. Okay, this will be your B point. Okay, and this will be your B point. What is your third point? Your third point is, C point is, there are three different types of reverse proxy server. Listen carefully. If you are not able to understand, let me know. There are three different types of reverse proxy server. Okay. One is IaaS. Second one is Apache. Third one is Nginx. IaaS will run under Windows operating system. Apache will run under Linux operating system. Nginx will run under iOS operating system. Or you got my point? So here The next point of D is here IAS will run under Windows operating system. Windows operating system. Whereas Apache will run under Linux operating system. Linux, it should not Linux. Linux operating system. People are calling in a different way. Okay. Linux operating system. And Nginx will run under iOS operating system. Right? So these are called as reverse proxy servers. What is the advantage I am going for reverse proxy server? Why do I need to go for reverse proxy server? To go with the reverse proxy server, there are three information I can able to handle. One is to go with the reverse proxy server, three informations I can handle. Reverse proxy server will be used to implement authentication, authorization. I'll take all these things in the point. Caching, load balancing, etc. When I try to implement a reverse proxy server, I am ensuring only the valid user will come to my application to access. Once he enter into the application, there are different modules. Take an example of version ID. Version ID has admin department, faculty department, teaching department. A person who is being a super admin can able to access all the three departments. A person should become a faculty. He can access a faculty department. He can access student course conduction department. But you got my point. So you are validating with an authentication in which you are going to provide access and then you are going to provide the authorization. Or you got my point. So this is called authentication and authorization. Load balancing, I will teach you later point of time. Caching, I will teach you later point of time. So that's all for today. Tomorrow, 9:30, we will start sharply. I'll be here by 9:30. Okay, 9:30 to 10:30. We will start with HTTP protocol. We are going to discuss about HTTP protocol. Tomorrow topic is HTTP protocol. Now you all understand how the ASP.NET Core application works. ASP.NET Core has an inbuilt server called kernel. You got my point? Whenever you run an ASP.NET Core application, it has its own server called kernel. You got my point? And whenever you make a request from client to browser client to server, kernel server will get hit. Sir, how can I go and deploy ASP.NET application into an IaaS? For that, IaaS will be act as a reverse proxy server. Whenever a user make a request to IaaS will in turn talk to the kernel server. You got my point? And then it will process the request, give a response back to the IaaS. IaaS will give back to the browser. You got my point? How many different types of reverse proxy server we have 3. What are all they? IIS, Apache, Nginx. IIS will run under Windows operating system. Nginx will run under Linux operating system. Sorry, iOS operating system. Apache will run under Linux operating system. Why do we need to go and implement a reverse proxy server? There are 4 different information. One is authentication, authorization, caching, load balancing. Preeti, you got the point?
Yes, sir.
So tomorrow we will connect at 9:30. Thank you all.
Thank you.